Michael, thank you for making this time. It's great to see you. I
Absolutely.
really
Great to see you.
appreciate this. Thanks. Listen, I think the starting point here is tell us about your journey. You've talked a little bit. I know in the past you've shared you've got some teaching background, but you've been part of city government for quite a while. Now you've stepped into the role of the mayor's office of nonprofit services. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, how you got from where you started to this particular moment, and how maybe some of that your investment in public service, how that's been shaped and how that shapes your thinking.
Yeah, great question. First off, thank you so much for having me, Greg, and for the work that you do in partnership with so many organizations who I know provide a really critical service. I really believe, and I know we've worked on other offerings or other initiatives that support workforce really near and dear to my heart. So thanks for all you and your member organizations do, and thanks for having me. Um, I would say I've always really been someone who derives a deep satisfaction from helping people. It's just part of my DNA. I grew up in a family that believed in public service and helping people. And I spent summers with my grandparents in New Mexico, my aunts and uncles. My aunt ran a Montessori in New Mexico. I would spend summers helping out there. My grandfather has a long history of public service in and around New Mexico and DC. So I remember being 10 years old and helping him on a gubernatorial campaign in New Mexico for a friend of his in northern New Mexico. So it's just really been a part of my DNA. And I really can't imagine anywhere else I would be, but in or adjacent to public service. And at the same time, I'm really someone who likes to do the work, not just talk about it, but actually be about it. And I went to grad school at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs and was very fortunate to work under Professor Esther Fuchs there. And at that point, that was the tail end of the Obama administration. And at that point, I had fantasies of going to DC and working in the federal government, as many millennials were inspired by President Obama. And she was like, "Do you want to? You strike me as someone who likes to do the work, not talk about it. Do you want to just like talk about public service? You actually want to like get in there because city government, the lights have to turn on, the trash has to be picked up, and it's like just where the rubber meets the road in public service." So she totally sold me on it, and I found myself starting at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services in 2016, and have been with the city ever since.
I appreciate that this is public service is part of your DNA, something that you were sort of a part of who you are from the
Yeah.
beginning, and I know that, and the fact that you're connected to Esther Fuchs is an amazing. That's inspiration and aspiration right there, all rolled into one.
Oh yeah.
I got to ask, when you first started at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, what is day one like? And I'm always
Mhm.
curious what the story is when someone walks into city government for the first time.
That's such a funny question. Because I do remember Professor Fuchs. She was like, "Oh, you should go to like OMB. You'll really learn how to government works." And I was interviewing in different places, and I remember going back to her and being like, "So I have an offer from the Mayor's Office of Contract Services." She was like, "Oh my God, you'll really understand what government is then. Like procurement is how they actually do things. So like go." And after I Googled procurement and tried to figure out what it was, my first day, I remember I sat next to a guy who eventually became a really good friend, real procurement nerd, like, one of those people that like I love these type of public servants that just like totally nerd out on their sphere of influence or their what they really focus on. And I remember you being like, "So tell me what you think, what is procurement?" And I remember being like, "Oh, like the purchasing of these computers and the chairs we sit in." And he's like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh." And he's like, "It's everything. It's everything. Like community schools. Your wife works at a community school. That's a procurement. Henry Street does that through a procurement with the DOE." And he just like blew my mind how he reframed for me how the execution of and delivery of our human services, our construction, like everything we do is a function of a procurement, which means that our ability to deliver for New Yorkers is a function of how we navigate this process. So first day, we'll never forget just getting an education on what it actually means to deliver for New Yorkers through this wonky thing that I had stumbled upon.
That is true immersion, I think, from day one. And I want to dig into your sort of where your office is now, and where you see yourself. But before we do that, and maybe for context purposes too, I just want to say, um, I don't know about you, but I find that there is an understanding that folks who've been in city government have, that folks that is different than perhaps in some cases the understanding that folks who've solely been in the human services sector had. And when it comes to procurement, here is where we have to figure out how to talk to each
For
other,
sure.
align with each other, and activate. So again,
Mm.
do you find that to be true? And I know, again, I imagine this is something that you are in your current and future vision for the office, what you're trying to seek to respond to in some ways. But I'm just curious, do you get the sense, especially now as you make your rounds lately in the last 4 months or however long it's been that you've been in this role, as you talk to folks, do you feel like we're talking the same language, or is there a gap we need to bridge?
I think there are some gaps, and there's been a lot of changes in the last year, 10 years for sure, in the procurement space. But I think the way you put it is spot on. I mean, you know, it's possible that program staff at city agencies and program staff at nonprofits might speak a different language, maybe like this is how the program staff navigates OMB and like their assistant commissioners and like all that. And this is what it means on the ground. But what I think you're pointing out is the friction point where the rubber meets the road is the like procurement, budget analysts, fiscal, legal shops that do the dance to actually allow for the service delivery. And it is funny how when I will go to different nonprofits, um, they do speak the language. Like you'll find the nerds, you'll
Yep.
find the procurement nerds that like knows what a
Mhm.
POCR is, understands what release 6 of Passport was and what the document vault is. Like, not everybody, and certainly like sometimes like executive directors have to think about a lot of different things. It's same here for deputy mayors or commissioners, but the folks who are like in the system day to day, like they are highly knowledgeable at the nonprofit end and at the city agency end.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you also sort of framing this around the idea that there are different folks at different stages and different expectations placed on each, as we navigate what, again, context is a very challenging contracting environment right now. And on
Yeah,
that note, you took on this shop at a time that is particularly challenging. Um,
I did.
I'd love to start. I mean, really, I'd love to just start from the perspective of what do you see as success? And then I know we can kind of dig into this idea of, well, actually, let's back up to say, what does this office see as success? What do
Mm.
you see as success? And then I think we can dig into some of the specific initiatives I think you've put in motion and want and seek to put in motion.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying I was very aware of the role I was stepping in. Um, when a couple of deputy mayors had approached me about the opportunity, I do remember being at first like, wow, okay, this is not one of those, you know, head of executive directors of Mayor's Office X where you get to like sit back and give keynote
Right.
speeches and, whatever. This is an emergency. And, you know, I did feel uniquely qualified for a few reasons, besides my ego, for the opportunity. And so, uh, I'm very aware that this role is just all hands on deck to get folks paid. So with that, what I see as success is, I track very specific indicators that I really expect. And I'm doing everything I can to see movement on over the next quarter, over the next year. And so what we've really done is I've been very fortunate to bring a couple of key staffers in, one in particular who I worked with at the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, who like knows the passport system like the back of his hand, has the relationships across agencies, and has really helped articulate, all right, from the selection to registration to payment process, here are from the system the key places where we can track cycle time and really pinpoint where things are getting stuck. And so to your question, like for me, what success is one, we have identified that broadly and started tracking cycle times across the board, but agency by agency. Two, we have now asked each agency to develop an action plan that is responsive to their cycle time data and their qualitative data. So for me, the game is really like every month, every quarter, I need to see chipping away at both the cycle time and the backlog of budget modifications, of invoices, et cetera. And at the same time, the other thing that we are really maniacal about tracking is the sentiment. And so we do a quarterly provider sentiment survey, and I expect from these interventions to see a significant increase and those values. And to me, that is a healthy partnership. Like folks from the nonprofit sector understand that their agency partners are there in partnership with them, that they're providing a customer service to them, and at the same time see a significant reduction in some of the key cycles that are in the critical path of folks to getting paid.
I want to acknowledge that sort of sentiment and that effort being made to address both sentiment, I should say, and specific uh, results. And this idea of this isn't simply a matter of let's get folks paid. This is also about what does customer service look like, and how is it that folks feel like they're being received and responded to. So it's not simply a matter of are we reducing the timelines. We're also sort of thinking about are we figuring out how to work better together. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's totally. And thanks for pointing that out. Is I think, what's interesting about the data is it's not like agency or city-wide where we have an issue here. There are specific portfolios that have like their own nuanced reasons why, but there are a handful of agencies whose performance is pretty strong. And unsurprisingly, the sentiment sort of they're correlated, right? People feel like they're having a better experience because they are having a better experience, but also they're having a better experience because there is that partnership and like solving problems together. And so I say that to say that like it is possible. Like there is at least one agency in particular who's you're never going to hear an issue from them. And when I talk with their providers, when I talk with the agency, like what's the secret sauce? Like they all have to navigate Passport, which is a newer system for many. They all have to follow the PPB rules. It's the same road they travel down. And I think what it comes down to is providers feel like they're partners and that like they solve problems for them and that they are in the trenches with them and see like their outcomes in getting the payment and navigating the contracting process as central to what they do at their agency. So yeah, I think they're completely intertwined. And when I can point to the high performers who have the strong qualitative outcomes, which are strongly correlated with those quantitative ones.
And in my best assessment analysis, based on what I've heard anecdotally and otherwise, there is a particular agency I know that is performing particularly well and successfully. There's a lot of reasons for that. It obviously has to do with a lot of staff and a lot of how the work is happening and taking place. But I also know that the one entity that I'm thinking of is led by someone who is very recently in the not-for-profit sector, in the sense that someone may be particularly acutely aware of what those needs and interests are, might be part of that story. Not gonna call it any names here, just simply to say that awareness may be valuable. But there's a lot of parts and pieces because again, there's a lot of folks in city government with history in human services. So all that to say, there's a lot of pieces that have to fit right to make this work.
For
But I
sure.
appreciate you highlighting success. Unfortunately, a lot of our providers and folks that are on that will observe this particular video and read about this will be thinking about how it is that they are doing as well or not as well as they would like. And on that note, I'll just say I want to dig into some of the initiatives you're putting forward to focus on, I think, righting the ship and or restoring sort of what has been lost, or maybe building the right things for the first time. But I want to start by saying that I have been in settings with you from time to time where I have seen you directly say to people, if you've got an issue, call me. And so I just want to, meaning you've turned to people and said, if there's an urgency, if there's a crisis, if there's something, I want to deal with it. And I say that for two reasons. One, I think those providers that I have seen receive that from you have appreciated that direct sense of connectivity, because sometimes that can be very hard to find, especially with agencies that have to deal with multiple sort of city government entities to figure out how to make things work. But I will also say to you, I do recall history from the de Blasio administration where there was a specific individual who would do the same thing, who's no longer part of the administration, but did that too. And it leads to this idea of that desire to make that direct connection matters a great deal, and also it doesn't always address the systemic problem. So on that note, I'd love to hear a little bit, why you choose to make that type of connection, and then as you pivot to maybe some of the initiatives that you're focused on to address some of the systemic challenge, I think would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Thank you for the kind words. As I have said many times, like I think, I don't think of bureaucracy as a bad word. I think bureaucracies are just people. And, where you see strong outcomes, I think is a strong collection of bureaucracy and an alignment on that bureaucracy from the top down, to executing, as efficiently and as empathetically as possible with your partners. Um, but so it's important to me that in my role, people feel like they have an ombudsman and an ear at the highest levels of city government. And so I'm very happy to be very accessible to folks. And it's not like I often hear people like, oh, I don't want to bother him. Like I have staffers, and I have one staffer in particular whose job is like, when I get incoming, you go directly and try to figure out and solve the problem with the agency. So it's, I hope your audience knows that they shouldn't think twice about whether they bother me. One is my job. Two, I've set up systems in place to be able to like make sure folks are executing on it. But yeah, very important to me, which I guess I'll pivot to the initiatives. Like the first thing I knew going into this role is really from my playbook of different initiatives that I've run through city government and through City Hall. In 2022, I was the City Hall lead for the Clear the Backlog initiative that unlocked over $6 billion for nonprofit providers. I could spend an hour talking about that. It was really a seminal uh, part of my city career and thinking through how you move change and move a massive bureaucracy or bend it to your will. But one of the secret sauce really was just having somebody who the commissioner appointed to be accountable totally and own totally the results and the creativity of harnessing their agency's resources to unlock these contracts. And so I knew I needed something like that. Also because, I get incoming all the time, and if I had to think twice, like, oh, does this go to the GC or should I go to the ACO for this? Like, I would waste time in trying to figure out and pinpoint who. So what we did is in my third week, we um, worked with lots of different folks and created an executive order that established chief nonprofit officers at each city agency and oversight entities as well. And really, we wrote the executive order. It's these folks are there to offer a customer service and to be responsive to the sector, but maybe just as important to be accountable to my office and reducing cycle times and getting nonprofits paid. It's like clearly articulated in the executive order. So that is like would be good in and of itself to have. And I think some folks were like, cool, well, when did those people get hired? Well, immediately, what we did is we worked with our partners at OMB, who, relaxed, or I guess I should say not relaxed, exempted human service contracting positions that have to do with nonprofit payments from the 2-for-1 freeze we've been in. So I got to go to agency heads and be like, I know I'm coming right off with a new executive order. We have to appoint someone, but hey, I also got you this exemption. So like make use of that exemption, get folks hired on, and at the same time appoint someone ASAP. So we have chief nonprofit officers. Everybody should go to my website or follow the tiny URL, which is tinyurl.com/chief nonprofit officers, where every chief nonprofit officer and their contact information is listed, but it's key to the real like human infrastructure we're building to allow for the bureaucracy to be responsive to our nonprofit providers. So that's one. But I won't spend much more time on that. But lastly, if you want to jump in, and I'll go to other pieces, but I'll just say, um, we're really thinking or being thoughtful about building a community with our chief nonprofit officers because, as I mentioned, there's some agencies high performing, some that we want to really support, but having this community where they're like, well, how are you tackling that? Oh, I didn't know we could do that. And also like there's often a thing where an agency will be like, oh, well, that contract's with OMB, nothing I could do. Well, OMB has a chief nonprofit officer, and their job is to help you sort of navigate this. So, did you reach out to OMB's chief nonprofit officer and ask for this to be expedited given the situation? So, we're building that community and holding them accountable and pushing them to really look at their data and think through interventions that make sense for their agency head and their agency, but also for their providers. Did you want to jump in before I go to a couple others?
No, go ahead. I think I appreciate you building on that, and I also want to acknowledge that I think just as this thread, we sort of dig into this a little bit in terms of building the infrastructure and the individuals. That's a layer of accountability. That's a
Yeah.
you talked about the certain order of things, and I think that's particularly important. So I appreciate you sort of framing it that way. I also want to just note in this moment, I think clarity matters a lot, especially when I think folks are sort of existing in a world that is particularly complicated, and folks are feeling stressed. And I think universally, I'm talking about all sectors right now. I think when morale could tend to be particularly challenging, or when there are staffing crisis points. And so order matters, but also I think acknowledging effort and hard work matters too. And on that note, I should say to you, for the championing the backlog initiative for making it possible, we should probably start from the perspective of we can get big things done. So if we're in a difficult time period, we can move needles. But please continue on the initiatives, because I know you
No,
want to highlight those.
no, thanks for saying that. I mean, just totally like this is not an insurmountable thing, right? This is just about organizing people, making sure they're clear on what success is, and making sure principals understand and are tracking that success and care about it. And so, like, I really see for me, my two main stakeholders are the nonprofit providers, but also the city agencies, right? So I need to support and push both of them, but ultimately, I need to also make sure that City Hall and the deputy mayors understand that my hair is on fire about this and that they're on doing what they can to unlock resources. And so I meet with them weekly, which is like, I was at City Hall for 5.5 years. I never saw a weekly meeting just on nonprofit payments, but I have that. I convene them. And so that is a venue that I have to just make sure they never take their eye off the ball here, which has been really helpful. Having the Eye of Sauron is great, but it's also like, okay, then they increase their expectations. But for me, I welcome that. So yes, thank you for saying that. I'd say just a couple more that I'll mention is contract stat. And this was actually from the joint task force report at the start of the administration, the incoming comptroller and incoming mayor. They got together and there was a list of like all stars, who's who from the human service contracting world that got their heads together and I think came up with 19 recommendations, if I remember correctly. I think thing one was no matter what you do, you need to start with clearing the backlog of retroactive contracts, which is why we started there. But then there was a lot of other ones in there. Stuff that we have done, like we've addressed the discretionary contracting issues. Like I would like to go very bold, but we got a modest but very impactful reform through where we added the multi-year contract language to discretionary contracts, reduced payment times by 90% this fiscal year, and hope more and more in the coming years. And we put in the allowance clause where now we have a 25% buffer, basically, where if there's a money change less than 25%, we don't have to do a whole new amendment process. We just do a budget modification, which is great. So those all are amazing policy reforms that we will continue to push forward. But as I've said before, and I've shared with you, Greg, there's really like I wish there were a silver bullet from a policy standpoint. I really just think it comes down to management. And so that's why we're leaning on contract stat, which is, as I mentioned, taking all of the data from the system, having a baseline set of cycle times from the key parts of the contracting process that lead to payment, having a sense of curiosity with our agencies and our chief nonprofit officers as to, hey, it takes agency X 4 days to go through the budget modification. It takes you significantly longer. Why is that? Why are you set up that way? And then we have different teams from City Hall that we've deployed to actually go into the agencies and lift the hood up and be like, what is the process here? Why is this like this? Which has actually been really helpful. So just having this like, it's the product is not just the dashboard that we have, but it's really just the practice of having folks come around the table on a monthly basis, look at their data, understand what needs to be addressed, and have the empowerment of City Hall and their agency heads to really move things around to address it, to reduce cycle times and improve payment. So really, it's key to the way in which we're going to manage out of this. And again, it was really from the playbook of the Clear the Backlog initiative and having this like data-driven management style. And then the other one I'll mention is from the culture change standpoint is really just having a space where we're celebrating both our nonprofit providers, but also our city agencies, my two stakeholders. And really, this is a key moment for us. And it's not just like a nice to have moment, but is really an opportunity for us to pinpoint to all of our city agency partners what excellence in customer service and service delivery is. And so we're asking our nonprofit partners to nominate agency staff, city agency staff who go above and beyond for them, because we often hear that, agency X might be really difficult to work with, but like Greg at DYCD is awesome. And so we want to lift that up, but also this is a staff, the city agency procurement staff. I've worked with them for many, many years. They don't always get their just desserts. In fact, if the commissioner knows who their name is, oftentimes something went wrong. And so we're trying to flip that narrative and really make it an opportunity to celebrate excellence, pinpoint and point to the rest of the workforce what excellence looks like, and hold folks to that standard, while also making sure that the public knows. And I don't think the public fully understands this. When we make an announcement about a new program, as I mentioned, it really is our nonprofit partners that are delivering them. And so I'm also trying to make sure the public understands what I understand and appreciate. And also our city agency workforce appreciates that to get things done as we want to in this administration, in this critical human service space, it comes from our nonprofit partners. And I don't want any more to celebrate in silence the work they do, or like the hoops they will jump through for their clients. And so we'll have this opportunity be for city agencies also to nominate nonprofit providers who go above and beyond for New Yorkers. So a lot more, but I would just say like our home base and my North Star is getting folks paid. And I'm really leaning into what is in my sphere of influence, which I think is management and culture change.
That's I appreciate you saying so. Can you have time for two more questions? We'll do two
Absolutely.
more
I'm
here.
here. I'm here.
Uh, um, First off, I recognizing as you did, and I tried to articulate, there's history here of addressing big things, the backlog initiative. I also think it's interesting to say, as you pointed out, the Human Services Recovery Task Force, there actually have been written sort of playbooks about
Yeah.
things, recommendations. So the pieces of the puzzle are in place, or at least there are pieces of the puzzle. And,
Right.
now it's a matter of how it is that we support the teams and the units and build or rebuild the staffing components to probably execute on those particular goals and ambitions, and celebrate the successes as hard as we dig into the things that are our weaknesses
That's right.
or complexities. The hard question right now is this. I think there are entities that are part of our coalition that may be watching this who are at the same time saying, I'm still really far behind.
Right.
I've
That's
done the
cute, but
outreach. I've made the
I
connection.
can't make
This is
payroll.
all
Right.
great. And yet I am continuing to be in crisis about making payroll. And let me just say this to anybody who's watching this. Um, if you are in a position where you are worried about making payroll, you have to talk to us.
Yeah.
And when I say us, I think it's fair, Michael and me and
Oh
others,
yeah.
and others within the human services space, and otherwise to tag team, because it should not be the case that anyone is left to decide, even in a moment of crisis, even in a moment of where we're all experiencing complexity and challenge. But the question just would be, Michael, what's the message you want folks to have who are watching this and saying, this all sounds great, and also I'm X amount of millions. I am worried about payroll. I'm losing staff. I don't know whether or not I should even start a program or
Yeah.
continue a program because we're so far behind. And by the way, like I do, some of those folks will say, well, I'm caught up in FY23, but I'm behind in
Yep.
24. I'm still owed money for 21, and my contracts aren't registered for 20. It's that kind of experience as well, as you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is what I like keeps me up every night.
Mhm.
Thinking about these providers. And there's not like I was just on a call where I was trying to articulate to folks where I think of like four different types of nonprofit providers. Um, and they need different things, right? I think of like the large organizations who are diversified in their funding streams. Not as dire necessarily for them with the delay in city payments. Although if they significantly rely on federal funds, even the perception of that being at risk makes everything more acutely felt. And then there's the large organizations for whom they are very reliant, like 80% more on city funds. And then there's the smaller organizations who are diversified and the smaller organizations who are overly reliant on city payments, meaning their delays are like existential to them. So um, I guess what I would say is one, you were not alone. You do not have to suffer in silence or suffer alone in this, right? As Greg was saying, I am here. It is literally my job to be working with you and hacking bureaucracy to get you what you need as appropriate. And so my email is msedillo@mons.nyc.gov. That's M, S as in Sam, E as in Edward, D as in David, ILLO at mons, mons.nyc.gov. Please email me if it's a dire situation. Always helpful if you include the contract number and the contracting agency. I often hear folks that are like, well, I don't want to upset my contracting agency. Like, that's what I'm here for, right? Like I do it with great respect from my public servants, but I'm maniacally focused on solving problems. So that's what I'm here for. Do not hesitate to reach out. Um, Two, you're also not alone at the agencies. And I know every day our chief nonprofit officers at agencies are solving problems on behalf of their nonprofit providers. They get very creative, especially if there are existential issues from a payroll or other standpoint. So reach out to your chief nonprofit officers. That's who I go to when there's an issue. So you are also free to, on our website, as I mentioned, tinyurl.com/chief nonprofit officers are all their content information. They are literally by executive order, the languages, they are there for you. So ask for help. Nobody should feel above it, or nobody should feel you'll be penalized for reaching out for help. The other thing I'll say to you is that you really have the ear of City Hall leadership on this. This is not a space or an administration that is afraid to get in the weeds on this. Like, as I mentioned, I have 30 minutes every Thursday afternoon where I walk them through situational awareness. We spent 45 minutes last week really digging into one agency's budget review process, which again, the data showed us is a significant blocker to getting payments out. So everyone from the mayor on down understands that we rely on nonprofits to execute our human services. And so you are not alone, and the highest levels of government really are aligned and rowing in the same direction to get to do the hard work of navigating this system to get you guys paid.
In terms of just navigating, you referenced, I think you labeled it contracts that,
Mhm.
I think you referenced that before, and I know I'd been on a
Yeah,
call with you where you'd said that.
yeah,
If I understand, if I remember correctly, that's not something that's going to be public, right? This is an internal tool,
yep.
but I think there is some expectation over time, perhaps, that you will have the ability to make some aspect of this a more public, a public tool. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say that I definitely believe in transparency. I believe in the value of making performance data transparent and public. I also think it's fair to say that the real magic that I have seen in the past is making sure principals who are accountable to results are uh, very simply and plainly see performance and are given the tools to act upon it. So right now, it's just an internal management program, but I do hope and expect that in the future, some versions of that will be more public.
And I guess the final thought here would be, where do you want, or what is it that you want from the human services, the nonprofit, the coalition members? What is it that specifically you might want them to know or act on? It is certainly the case, by the way, and I'm not telling any tales out of school here and saying there are challenges in the city government side. There are challenges in the nonprofit space as well in terms of contracting and management. This is a circumstance where getting paid matters more than anything, and there are improvements and adjustments that have to be made across the board. But I guess I'm just wondering, what is it that you want to impart in terms of guidance, wisdom, expertise, and or what do you need from the providers to support the work going forward, or to be able to ensure the best results in relation to your vision for where you're headed?
Yeah. Um, like I said, one, as you just mentioned, reach out if you need help. Don't suffer in silence. We're here to help you is the number one thing I want to make sure everybody here leaves understanding. Um, Two, I would say, I have a hearing in a couple of weeks on this topic. We have proposed some bold solutions before to our partners at the City Council. Particularly, I know there's a huge pain point in discretionary contracts. It is something that is just, from my perspective, broken by design in the process. Um, the sector helping us push our friends at the council to be as bold as possible with how we're reforming that process would be really helpful. I also want to make sure folks know that there are other tools available. The Returnable Grant Fund from the Fund for City of New York and Mox is there for you. And so just like there are tools and support systems there with you. And then I think more broadly, I often hear about the system issues with Passport. And remember that I was around for the first release of Passport, not dissimilar. And from my friends that worked in the rollout of Accelerator, there was never a moment where everybody was like, Accelerator is amazing, right? And yet somehow we navigate it every year in and year out. Not excusing that, like, providers and our our partners deserve the like best in class systems to navigate payment processes. But I do think that there is a little bit of a shock to the system when you do the necessary changes to
Mhm.
upgrade and update systems, and like separate the emotions of the system and the change management aspects of it. And maybe your staff who's like really day to day and like, dang, this like completely changed my day to day. And like that might be how it's lifted up from the like long game, which is it was a necessary change. Bumps will be along the road with any system change. But we've done a lot of different things to ensure that you have the capital and can do a lot of different creative things to make sure you have the capital where appropriate to make sure you're navigating any sort of technical issues that might come up.
I appreciate you saying that. Passport, I know, is on everyone's mind in a different way. I think the idea of ensuring that the city is resourcing whatever changes, adaptations, or other corrections need to be made to Passport so that it continues to be a tool that we can utilize as effectively as possible, I think is something that I'm sure will come up at the hearing as well, in addition to other
For sure.
strategies and efforts that need to be made. And just to sort of wrap us up,
Mm,
the idea that this is a moment where I would suggest it's not just city government, but it's also the philanthropic community. It's
mm,
also the business community and the human services not-for-profit membership coalition
mm,
entities that want to figure out how to do this and get us to a better place because we are feeling the pressure, the anxiety. You
right.
are up all night. There are lots of folks on every level of organizations and entities and agencies that are feeling this and the desire to be able to, I think, find ways to work in partnership, collaboration, to push each other in all the different ways we need to correct, so that systemically we can see better outcomes and results. I think is a shared goal. So, Michael, I think you've
For
been
sure.
working very hard to communicate that message to folks. I try to champion it the same way. And at the end of the day, there's still a great deal of work to do. So I hope you see that as something we're doing together. And however
Absolutely.
it is that we can continue to be supportive and want to do that. Let you have the final word. Anything we didn't cover, we missed, or anything else you want to put out to the universe here, feel free. The floor is yours.
Great. I think I'll just start by again thanking you, Greg. You're one of the few people externally that always asks how they can help and asks what city government needs. Um, and so much so that it's almost arresting when I'm asked. I'm like, I don't even know. I rarely answer that question. So just thank you for the true partnership you offer and the dogged advocacy you have on behalf of your members and ultimately the New Yorkers who are receiving the services. Um, but I would just say, I want everyone to know that I take this incredibly seriously. I am someone who has navigated challenges before in and outside of government, and I have never failed, and I don't intend to here. But I ask for your support and I ask for your partnership and making sure that we're working together to change the system, change the culture, and ensure we are managing appropriately across agencies. And that requires you guys letting me know your ideas or letting me know where things aren't going exactly perfectly, where I might be able to jump in and support. But I'm very fortunate to be in this role. It's in many ways a dream role, even if it's in a total emergency. But I take it incredibly seriously, and thank you for working in partnership.
Well, listen, for your service, past, present, and future, thank you so much. We know this is a very difficult time in city government across the board in every way. But again, for what you have accomplished thus far and what you're seeking to, thank you. Lots more to come. Michael, thanks for this. It's an absolute pleasure to have a conversation with you. And I know we're going to talk more.
Yep, pleasure's all mine. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.